Good morning, good night. Today we're going on a rant, okay? Bear with me. We're talking a little bit about nostalgia and how that's used when selling automobiles. So we're auto nostalgia gone right, auto nostalgia gone wrong. So what really started this? Well, Acura, which is US's luxury brand for Honda, right? It's their luxury division. Acura is launching their new Integra. They've been hyping this up. They've been putting the name out there. The Integra is coming back. It's gonna be a big deal. And like they're showing sort of images of the old Integra. They're really creating this sort of pulling on these memories. You know, I remember distinctly, you know, standing as a kid in my front yard and watching an Integra zoom by. I thought that is the coolest car in the world. They're hyping up this name, and then they revealed the car, and it's not what we expect. It's not the small, lightweight performance coupe. It's a sedan, and it looks heavy, and it has no connection to the old car. Let's talk a little bit about this. And like all of the comments are very negative. So, you know, so all of the comments are very negative. Let's figure out why we're upset about this. Let's see if we can dive into the psychology of the enthusiast. All right, so the Integra used to be sort of, it was always based on a Civic. That's not a surprise. That's fine. Base it on the Civic. The Civic's great. The Civic is a great entry-level car, okay? The Integra was based on that, right? It shares the chassis, it shares suspension components, it shares a lot, and that's fine. But it always had its own unique body style, it always had its own unique performance things, and it had a unique engine, always a better engine than the Civic. Now today, we have a pretty damn good Civic in the States, right? We've got, I guess it's the Civic, the Sport, the SI, and then you even have the Type R. You've got a lot of different tiers of Civics, so a little hard for me to figure out like where the Integra slots in, because what they're saying is it's sort of the luxury model that slots above the Civic Si, but below the Type R, but maybe not. But the car they revealed is, it looks big, it looks fat, it looks heavy, and mostly it just looks meh. It looks very meh. It just looks very corporate. It looks like every other Acura out there, and so they were hyping this up as the Integra, like we're bringing something back. They just gave us another ILX. The TLX, which is their mid-size sedan, it's sort of their sport sedan. I use sport kind of loosely. It looked great. It's a handsome-looking car, but it's also forgettable. I think that's what is kind of the problem here with the new Integra. It's immediately forgettable, and they're hyping it. They're painting it yellow. It's just not doing anything for anybody off the bat, you know? The other thing that's a real problem with this is there's no visual elements to tie it back to the Integra of the past. You know, there's no, first of all, it's 4 doors, which little did I know, apparently in other parts of the world, there was an Integra 4-door from the 90s that I didn't know about. It was ugly. Because in the US, I always think of the Integra as a coupe. Right? It was a 2-door, 2+2 coupe. But the new one is not. The new one has 4 doors. And I don't love that, right? I don't love it from the heritage standpoint, but I kind of get it. You need the 4 doors if you want to sell a car, especially a sedan in the US market today, because the coupes don't sell. It simply don't sell. I mean, unless you're a Corvette and you're targeting like the absolute performance market, something sort of middle of the road doesn't sell. So I kind of can let them slide on the 4 doors, but the rest of the styling is just TLX, you know, and maybe a smaller package. You know, there's no pod headlights. It's 4 doors. It doesn't have any unique styling elements that really set it apart from the rest of the Acura range. You know, it doesn't look more sporty, honestly. It doesn't look more aggressive. And it just doesn't have any of the heritage elements that you would expect. And so my biggest frustration is it just looks like a soft evolution of the ILX. It looks like they were working on the ILX next generation. That's what it looks like. And then at the last minute, without talking to styling, without talking to the designers, without talking to engineering, the marketing department says, we're not going to call this car an ILX. Like, you've built this car. I see it and I like it. It's a great ILX, but we're not going to call it an ILX. We're going to call it an Integra because we'll be able to sell more that way. And everyone's kind of like, what? The Integra? Yeah, we'll just call it the Integra. People won't know the difference. And that's the problem, because it feels disingenuous and it feels derogatory to me as an enthusiast, because it's like as if I wouldn't be able to tell the difference, as if I'm too dumb to understand what this thing is. Like, oh, it's an Integra, you should be happy about it, but it's not, right? So, look, spend a lot of time complaining about it. It's probably gonna be a great car. And so here's the real rub now. So we have Honda giving us, enthusiasts, what we've been asking for: 6-speed manual, limited slip differential, a sports sedan, something supposed to be lighter, something performance focused. We'll see. They haven't given us a single number on it. We don't know the weight, we don't know the horsepower, we don't know anything. We do know that it's going to start with the 1.5 liter turbo from the Civic. And unless they tune the crap out of it, it's going to have the performance of a Civic. Maybe worse. You know why? Because it's probably going to be a heavier car than the Civic, because they've added luxury to it. So I think it would have been better received if they did something a little bit more unique from the Acura line, and something that incorporated more styling cues from the past Integras. But there are lots of redeeming factors here. And here's the thing. It's probably going to be a good car, but I don't know if it's going to sell. And this is all speculation. Marketing has taken it in this weird direction. They've changed the name at the last minute to Integra. I just don't get it, right? So here's the redeeming factors of the actual car. It's a manual transmission, and it's a Honda transmission. It's going to be great. Thank you, Honda, for keeping manual transmissions 6-speed alive. It's a liftback. That's cool. That's great. I want a hatch on a sedan. That's awesome. It's a good thing. This base model Integra has a limited slip differential and good brakes out of the box. So, all right, they're doing some things that are really right for the performance market. The 4 doors means it has a usable back seat, and it's got, this sort of, I call it an unfortunate roofline, because it would look better if it was just like a straight slope or something more sexy, but it's going to be actually usable with the styling that they've given the rear roof. There's actually going to be probably adults that fit in the rear of that car.
So the way I see it, this is the problem with calling the new Acura an Integra. Once you've connected the name to it, you've tickled the sort of emotional center of our brain, in the back of the head. We've gone into the deep brain, the undeveloped, caveman brain. And you've said Integra, and you've tickled it, and you've released these weird endorphins and memories. And you've tapped into this nostalgia. But now that you've revealed this car, it doesn't live up to the hype. And so we're already in this emotional state where we want me want Integra good, so good, give me, I want shifty good Integra. And then you don't give it to me. And then I'm like, well, no, it's not good. And then I'm so angry. I'm like caveman angry. I'm flat fisting my anger onto these forums and stuff. And it's because you've tapped into this anger. Now, when the nostalgia works, you actually can give me something better than what you've actually done. You're building, the sum is more than the parts. Because when you build on the nostalgia, what you've done is you've tapped into all its history and all the emotional feeling that I already have, and then you've allowed your new product to sort of live in that ecosystem, and then all that emotion that I have in the back of my head, it's already there. I come in love with this product. It's like why Star Wars can have all these spin-offs, and because the original trilogy was so good, they built these characters and this world that was so excellent that they can just keep building on it, and as long as they tie it back appropriately to enough of the original trilogy and the traditional Star Wars lore, people buy into it. The point that I'm trying to tell you is you gotta treat this nostalgia right, because it's kind of a drug, and if you do it wrong, we'll hate you for it, because we're all hyped up and a caveman emotional.
We'll see about the Integra. they have to reveal more specs, and guess what? They're not done with it yet. They've introduced this platform. They've sort of said they're committing to making a performance product and really an environment around. So we expect the Integra Type S. We expect the super handling all-wheel drive. I don't know. Maybe they will come out with something like that, and then it's like, okay, but I can't judge that until they give me more specs. So at the moment, I think they did themselves a disservice in the way they revealed this, especially really, pulling at some of the old imagery of the old cars, because it just really highlighted the fact how this new car was not that, and that's a shame. It's a shame. So we'll see. Maybe Honda will make good on this promise on the name of the Integra, but I think they've really set themselves up in a hole to start. So we'll see where this goes. Now, it kind of got me thinking about what other products and car vehicles in the last few years have this same type of nostalgia thing going for them or against them. So the biggest negative, and it's just offensive, that comes to mind, and maybe you're thinking of it right now, is the Ford, say it with me, Mustang Mach-E. What the hell, Ford? What the actual hell, right? This is the most obvious case of nostalgia shilling, right? You're selling it cheap. This is frustrating for me because Ford is like arguably the biggest heritage of American brands. Oh, we started the production line. We did so much, and they did, like the Model T and everything. Okay, fine. But when you do this, when you take the Mustang name and you slap it on an SUV, you are selling your heritage cheap, and you are devaluing not just the Mustang name, the Ford name. It is offensive that Ford has done this. It's really terrible. And look, either your heritage means something or it doesn't, because they constantly remind us, of the years of the Ford F-150, the best-selling truck for 50 years or whatever the hell it is. Okay, fine, but be careful with that, because you keep driving home this point of heritage, and then you do something like this, and it sets the whole thing on a spin, right? So they're selling their heritage cheap here by calling the new SUV Mustang Mach-E. And let's take it a step further. Why is this offensive to enthusiasts? Because the Mustang is an enthusiast-first car, right? You've got these levels, and you pay respect to the Mustang because it's a classic car. It's a modern classic. It's a muscle car. It's a sports car. It does a lot of work for Ford in their lineup. They don't have, the Mustang alone in various guises competes against GM's Camaro, which is obvious, pony car versus pony car, but it also competes against the Corvette in a number of ways, because they have the Mustang GT 350 and GT 500. They have these sort of high power, expensive Mustangs. And so when you start taking this Mustang name and you just slap it on to something that is just so clearly not a Mustang, you're doing yourself a disservice, right? So the Mustang name should never, ever be on an SUV. Not today, not tomorrow, not next year. Not if... I won't even go any further, okay? The fact that the Mustang Mach-E is an electric vehicle does not help us here, but that's not actually the root of my problem here. If they had introduced, instead of the electric SUV, an electric coupe and called it the Mustang Mach-E, I would have no problem with that, okay? It's just a different power system in the same concept, and that's fine, But the fact, it's the fact that Ford has doubled down and not only called it this SUV a Mustang, but then called it with the Mach nomenclature. So the Mach was the Mach 1, which was a special looking Mustang. I don't know if it actually had much more power, but it was still a special looking Mustang and sort of unique in its own right. Now this SUV out of the box has the Mustang name and the Mach name. It's what is this? It just becomes frustrating. I wish Ford would have saved this Mach-E nomenclature for a true electric Mustang. So now I'm even disappointed for the future. Are they going to give us an electric Mustang? They better. I mean, it's guaranteed to happen. But what are you going to call it? You used the name already. So it's just annoying. It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know why they did it. There's no similarity between the SUV and the Mustang. And I think someone figured out they could add instant value to this new unknown SUV by attaching the Mustang name to it. And I get it. They're giving it Mustang elements of styling. The rear taillights, for example, the sloping roofline. Fine. All of that is good. I actually, here's the biggest problem. I actually like the Mustang Mach-E. I just hate the name. So again, putting yourself in a hole for no reason. So calling the Mustang Mach-E, the SUV, a Mustang, is kind of like having, okay, you're a restaurateur and you have a restaurant in New York City and the name of your restaurant is called New York Strip. Okay. Probably a steakhouse, right? Good. So you go there and you look at the menu, you know what's on there? Different cuts. It's called the New York Strip Ribeye, the New York Strip Flank, and the New York Strip Chuck Roast. And you're like, wait a second. I want a New York Strip steak. I want like a good cut of meat. And you're going to give me a chuck roast? And that's the point. It's deceptive, right? It's like you're giving someone something inferior and calling it something better. You're taking advantage of the people that don't know, and that is what's offensive to enthusiasts, right? It would have been better received if it was called literally anything. Just give it its own name. Let it start its own story. It was an exciting product. It is an exciting product. An electric SUV that's got like fast off the line performance, because all electric things these days do, and Ford had clearly dumped lots of money into this. They wanted this to succeed, but they just feel like they wanted it too bad, and then they started making these sort of bad decisions. Ford is clearly committed to this car, and I like that they're showing that commitment with the name, but I just don't accept that name on an SUV. It's just wrong. I think it's a cheap trick that Ford did with the Mustang Mach-E. I think it's like it wasn't thought through. And Ford, even Ford in their reveal video, made mention a couple of times to the fact that the engineering team did not want this name connected to it because they knew. And then, but at the end they were like, but after we saw the performance, we knew we could call this a Mustang. Screw you. You're just getting paid to say that. And your original emotional feeling was correct. An SUV cannot be a Mustang. End of story. I'm done. Okay. The next biggest one that enthusiasts are up in arms about, say it with me, Mitsubishi Eclipse Cross, okay? Guess what? You're talking to a guy, me, that grew up with a Mitsubishi Eclipse. My first car was a 91 Mitsubishi Eclipse, the base model, okay? And it had pop-up headlights, and what it lacked in power with its little 1.8 liter engine, which was not torquey, it made up for in great handling and just looking cool. It was so cool. Now the problem is the Mitsubishi Eclipse Cross, they bring this name back after they've discontinued. They don't even make an Eclipse anymore. They've discontinued the actual coupe. So it's not like these things are side by side. Like in the Mustang example, we have the Mustang, and now all Ford's, the website. I love Ford's website. They have the Mustangs, they have the whole series of Mustangs, and they have this SUV. I'm part of the crowd. No, you're not. Get the hell out of here. Anyway, we're done with Ford. All right, we're done with it. Instead, the Eclipse Cross has absolutely no connection. It's not even at least the Mustang SUV was Mustang styled. The Eclipse Cross is not Eclipse styled. It doesn't even look like I don't understand. It's not like Mercedes now. They call their 4-door SUVs, the coupe. This is the GLE coupe or whatever the nonsense is, because it's got a sloping rear. You can stop right there, Mercedes. A coupe means 2 doors, okay, not 4. So anyway, so this Eclipse Cross, you'd think at a minimum they would have been like, ooh, let's give it a sporty engine. Let's give it good suspension. No. Sloppy suspension, terrible handling, forgettable engine. It's okay. It's just, okay, we're just gonna call it an Eclipse. I don't know what else to call it. Whatever, And then we get into these guys. These sort of middle of the road. This doesn't super offend me. It's not super okay with me either. So let's talk through this. This is the Chevy Trailblazer and Blazer vehicles, right? So both of these SUVs names were sort of discontinued recently or a while ago, and then sort of reintroduced recently as small SUVs So let's talk about the Trailblazer first. It was sort of this forgettable mid-size SUV in the 90s and 2000s. It sort of had, middling performance and questionable build quality. It wasn't like GM's greatest time. It was kind of just like, a lot of plastic, exterior plastic, interior plastic. It just kind of, but at the end of the day, it was also like built to a budget, and for the price, you were getting a decent SUV with a few seats, for you and your kids, and room in the back for their soccer gear or their hockey gear or whatever the case may be. I mean, you could pull, a Bayliner or a Sea-Doo or something light. You could not pull a big boat. You could not pull a Grady White, okay? So the only one that actually enthusiasts cared about for this Trailblazer, because it's kind of a forgettable SUV, the only one that enthusiasts actually care about is the Trailblazer SS. And that one was cool because it was sort of lowered, and it had a custom, from the factory, unique body kit specific for the SS. And most importantly, it had the Corvette LS engine under the hood. So you had this thumping V8 with nice exhaust, and it sounded amazing. And suddenly you had like this sort of big SUV that would actually haul, and that's cool. So other than that, no one really cared. And now it sort of is this sort of compact SUV called the Trailblazer. And by the way, the new SUV, the little compact Trailblazer, looks pretty good. I just think it's sort of like a hatchback. It's been raised a few inches. So I don't know. It's not the greatest thing to kind of reuse the name, but at the same time, there wasn't much heritage there to begin with. And at least you're staying in the realm of SUVs. So it's not super offensive to me. The Blazer, however, is something a little bit more, it's a little bit of a different story. And the reason I said it is because the K5 Blazer was a loved vehicle, and it has a long production history, right? It ran from 1969 to the early 90s. It was decades, not just years, but decades of production. And it was just sort of recognizable as this two-box, big rear and kind of long square hood, this two-box styled SUV. And it was sort of an SUV before there were SUVs. It was sort of, it almost created the genre. And I think that, it's kind of disappointing that it comes back, now as this sort of crossover SUV. Don't forget there was simultaneously, there was also sort of the S10 Blazer, which was like the smaller version built on the small S10 pickup truck chassis. And now the new Blazer, I'm just going to call it the new Blazer, starting in 2019-ish, it feels more like an evolution of the S10 Blazer, like the little Blazer. And then so like what happened to the big Blazer? Sort of, it went from the K5 Blazer, which was huge and big and sort of the beginning of SUVs, and then that sort of seems to evolve into like the Tahoe and the Suburban, and then the Denali and all that, and then you have, the S10 Blazer, and that sort of seems like that evolved into the new Blazer. And then here's what's interesting, right? Chevy was careful when they named it and when they marketed this to say that the styling was of the new Blazer, the styling was Camaro inspired. Camaro inspired. Thank God they didn't call it like the Camaro SUV or like the Camaro SS SUV or the Camaro SS SUV or like some nonsense like this. The way Ford called the Mustang Mach-E, which again is Mustang styled. So they've sort of done it right. They've sort of done it wrong. It kind of feels like the Blazer name maybe belonged to something a little bit more tough than this crossover. But at the same time, I also think the new Blazer is fairly attractive crossover SUV. It's still in the SUV realm. They're careful with the way they say Camaro inspired, and that's fine. I love the Camaro inspired looks. That's good. The Camaro's an aggressive looking vehicle. And, they're building on some of that emotion, but without getting into the gray area where you start renaming things and re-envisioning things. So, all right, all that was kind of criticism. I want to go into, like, the positive side. So I told you we talk about Ford again. Ford actually has two hits here on the positive side. And one is the Ford F-150 Lightning. This feels so right to me. It's the electric F-150, and they're calling, and the Lightning, and they're bringing back the Lightning moniker, which was sort of the special F-150. There was 2 generations of it before. It was always gas-powered V8, and it was essentially, you know, a hopped-up pickup truck from Ford in the 90s and 2000s that was sort of lowered, and it wasn't really good for anything else than hauling ass, right? It was just a fast pickup truck, and people would do the quarter mile in it, and it was, you know, a drag truck from the factory, and people liked it. It got this sort of unique styling, as much as they could for, you know, the boxy truck of the day, and it was cool, you know. And now they're making an electric version of the F-150, and they're calling it the Lightning, and I like that. And you know why? It's going to have a ton of torque, and it's going to haul ass. It's like in the spirit of the same car, but they're modernizing it. It's great. Oh, and by the way, the Lightning name works perfectly with the electricity theme. So it's like a match made in heaven. I love this. It's an elegant evolution of the vehicle, of its story. Successful. Like, I haven't even, it's great. Good job, Ford. Good job. The next one, and this for me is an all-time, as much as I like the Ford F-150 Lightning, that's still a niche vehicle. Like the truck that the fast truck, the fast pickup truck, that's still niche. But this is going to make Ford some money because they did this right. The Ford Bronco. Yes, I watched the reveal on this. They got this SUV so right. This is the best thing Ford has done in a long time. They brought back the Bronco, but they brought it back as a retro modern SUV, and it works. They must have spent so much time on this. They got it just right. It feels like it invokes like the original Bronco from the 60s, but it still kind of looks modern. It still looks tough. It looks like it could take on the Wrangler, and that's the whole point, you know. And if it performs as Ford claims it's going to, right? Because I don't think anyone's really gotten these yet. I think they're maybe just being delivered now in 2021. You know, if it performs as intended, it's going to be a real Wrangler killer. You know, there's more options than a Wrangler. There's more engines. There's a 6, and I think there's a 4-cylinder turbo. There's a 6-cylinder and a V8, or at least there's one planned. There's a lot going right for this Bronco. And it looks so good. And it's just nice to have a little competition for the Wrangler, which was kind of in its own unique kind of like, oh, I can go doorless, I can pull the top off. You know, there's a lot that the Wrangler did right. I'm not discounting it. I think the Wrangler's a cool vehicle. But Ford just knocked it out of the park with this. And like on the first try, good job, Ford. You know, and they've tickled this nostalgia part of the brain, right? They've tickled it in the back. They've, you know, that the caveman brain, and they've touched it in the right way. So it just invokes positive memories. You know, and they're enhancing that story. They're building on that story. So there's already like novels in my mind of what's written on the Bronco. I owned a Bronco. I owned a 96 Eddie Bauer, which was sort of, you know, the newer generation. But it's cool. So I love this. You know, it fits into that emotional part of my brain. It doesn't upset the history. It sort of builds on it. They've done this so right. You know, and so we've talked about 3 different Ford things already, and it's clear that Ford sort of understands this concept of nostalgia because they're constantly trying to tie into it, and a couple of times successfully and a couple of times unsuccessfully, right? Even their slogan, Ford slogan, I've been looking at this, built Ford proud. Proud? Like proud of what? Proud of your heritage, proud of what they've done. They're again trying to tie into this nostalgia, you know, and they get the power there. They definitely know that there's power in nostalgia. It's just that the Mach-E is just such a misstep. It's disappointing that they would go that route because it feels cheap and it feels insulting. So let's bring it back to the channel. You know, I know I'm ranting on everything here, but at the end of the day, I'm just a car guy and I like cars. But let's bring it back to Lotus and talk about the Emira. I haven't posted anything on the Emira yet. And if you're curious about what I think about it, first of all, I love it, and I'll tell you why. First of all, I think what Lotus did with the Emira was really smart. You know, at first I was kind of frustrated it wasn't sort of the next generation of the Evora, because when you look at it and you start looking at the shape and the placement of the engine, and you realize actually, okay, it's just the Evora 2.0, you know, and they've already done the Evora 400 and the 410 and the whatever and the GT, you know, I think that's the one they have on sale right now is the Evora GT. but they're going to let that name die, and I think it's okay. They're sort of cutting ties a little bit with the Evora name, and they're rebranding it all as the Emira, kind of as the start of something new. And I'm okay with that. First of all, there's some excitement about something new, which Lotus needs to get their name out there. People don't even know what Lotus is, They say, who makes Lotus? Like, oh, Lotus makes Lotus. They're their own company. You just don't know them. They've changed, however, from a 2+2, which my Evora is a 2+2, but they changed from that to a more traditional, like 2-seater sports car. There's no additional back seats, and I think that's okay, right? The back seats were always sort of an asterisk, like kids only. And it's true, like I do not fit in the back. Even my wife probably doesn't fit in the back. She's 5'4", probably would not fit in the back of the Evora. We'll have to do that in a video sometime. But now, now we have the same packaging, but they've sort of moved the seats back a little bit. They've given more room in the interior now because they're not trying to fit rear seats back there. And they're making it a little bit more palatable for the average sports car buyer. And I think that's okay because it's still so unique. And they're trying to disconnect from some of the good reputation and bad reputation that the Evora has. But at the same time, they're still building on this tried and true platform that is really well developed. It's really well tuned. They know what they're doing. They know what they're getting. And like the Toyota V6 is great. They're supercharging it. They're getting plenty of power from it. Some of this, it doesn't necessarily need more power. The performance is there. It's a great car, and so it's a little bit unencumbered by cutting the name. It's a little unencumbered from the history of the Evora, and now it connects more with the future of the cars at Lotus, like the Evija, which is like the new Halo car representing the future of Lotus. So they've sort of started over again, and I think it's a smart idea. And the car is gorgeous. This is the best part about the Emira, is it's beautiful. There is not a single bad angle on that car. And I can't say the same for the Evora, even though I own one, because there are certain angles where you look at it and just it doesn't photograph well. It looks flat across the hood sometimes from certain angles until you kind of get down on it. But the Emira is just gorgeous from every angle. They sort of sculpted it more. It's more curvy. It looks both modern and classic at the same time. It's very nice. It does have the sort of nostrils the Evija does. And I understand that the nostrils are sort of polarizing, but they are there for a functional purpose. And they also are there to they're there because they make the car unique, but they're also functional. They create vortices as the air travels through over the car. So I dig the science of it. That's always, Lotus is always, they were the first, Lotus was the first to do ground effect in F1, right? To work with ground effects in the way that would hug the car to the ground. So it makes sense, and it ties into their heritage in a nice way this creates vortices, they're controlling the air, and that's kind of a deal, right? That's kind of a Lotus thing. I like that. One thing is a departure for them. They've strayed away from the circular taillights. Look at Esprit had circular taillights, the Exige circular taillights, the Elise circular taillights, the Evora, all of its generations use the same circular taillights, and they are looking a little long in the tooth. The taillights themselves have been around for a decade, and they look fine. They look fine. The new GRP taillights that everybody replaces them with look better. They simply look better. It upgrades the car with just a couple of bolts. They've gone away from the sort of bolt-in taillights and have gone to something more bespoke, right, with these custom, elegant taillights, and they look really good. I would be upset about it if they didn't look so darn good. That's the thing. If you're gonna change it for the better, and they have. Good job. Good on you, Lotus. Good job. The taillights look very Porsche to me, and I think that's okay. That's a good thing. That's the buyers that we're trying to attract around here. We'll see how this goes. I think the rest of the car looks really unique. It still has sort of the Lotus silhouette of the Evora, but it's just more modern and updated. They've done a lot right here. And, they got the same engine and transmission, which we know are good. They're adding the Mercedes AMG 4-banger, the Turbo 4 that makes a ton of power, That's going to be with the DCT, you know, the dual clutch transmission. It's a compelling package if you want to do all track work and you just want to blip through gear, boop, boop, boop. You know, it's interesting. You know, I think they're doing some interesting things with this. And at the same time, they've done it in a way that all of these changes are totally okay with me. I'm not offended by a single one. I think they're all good because they're not triggering that emotional center of my enthusiast brain. And I want to drive one. Lotus, send me an Emira. I'm going to go drive and give you a review. So that's it. Ran over. You know, I've gone through some of the things that upset me about nostalgia, some of the things that I like about nostalgia. I think it makes sense to tie into nostalgia when it makes sense, when it works. But you have to be careful with it. It's like a little bit of magic. There's good magic, there's bad magic. You don't want to just start using it at the wrong time. So, all that said, thanks for listening to my rant. I appreciate you. You know, subscribe, hit the bell, whatever you're supposed to do. I don't know. You know, just do your YouTube stuff. Thanks for watching. Good morning, good night, Lotus, and stick around.